The first thing I should clarify is that I am not the kind of person who eavesdrops on his neighbors. I am not nosy. I don't press a glass to walls or linger in hallways hoping to catch something useful. I'm a veterinarian in Halifax, which means I spend my days with animals that cannot lie to me, and I've grown to prefer that kind of honesty. So when I heard the woman next door crying through the shared wall of our duplex at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, I did not mean to stop and listen. I was just standing in my kitchen making tea, the way I always do when I can't sleep, and the sound came through the plaster like it had been waiting for a quiet moment to find me. I set the kettle down, stewed, still. The crying wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind you hear in movies, all gasping and collapse. It was worse than that. It was the kind that's been going on long enough to run out of fuel. Tired crying. The kind you do when you've already used up the louder version and all that's left is the quiet one. I looked at the wall. Then I looked at my front door. Then I looked at the clock on the microwave, which said 2:07 in green digits that felt very judgmental. I knocked on her door anyway. My name is Elliot Byrne. I'm 31, I grew up in Truro, and I moved to Halifax 2 years ago for a position at an animal hospital on Roby Street. The duplex on Agricola was supposed to be temporary. That's what I told myself when I signed the lease. Temporary, just until I figured out whether I was staying in the city long term, just until things settled. Things had not particularly settled. I'd been there 14 months. The woman in the other half of the duplex was named Wren. I knew her last name was Ashby because it was on the mailbox, and I knew she worked somewhere that required her to carry a large canvas bag full of what sounded like books, and I knew she made pasta from scratch on Sunday afternoons because the smell of it came through the kitchen vent like a standing invitation. I had never properly spoken to her. Halifax is a small city, but it has a talent for letting people live side by side without ever quite meeting, especially in winter. Especially when everyone moves fast and keeps their head down against the wind off the harbor. When she answered the door, she was wearing an oversized university sweatshirt, Dalhousie, navy blue, and her hair was in a lopsided bun, and she had clearly been crying but was doing the thing people do, where they reassemble their face very quickly to look like they haven't been. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I heard you, I said, and then immediately wished I'd led with literally anything else. Her expression did something complicated. Not offended, not embarrassed, just caught. Like a person who has been very careful not to make noise and now discovers the walls are thinner than advertised. I'm sorry, she said. I'll keep it down. That's not why I knocked. She looked at me again, more carefully this time. I was holding my mug of tea because I had brought it with me without thinking, which in retrospect made me look either very casual or like someone who'd wandered out of his own kitchen by accident, possibly both. Do you want to sit on the porch? I asked. It's cold, but there's a reason I said the porch instead of inside, which is that you don't know me, and I think that's the right call. Something in her face shifted. Not a smile exactly, more like the expression before a smile, when a person decides they're willing to risk one. Give me a second, she said. She came out in the same sweatshirt with a blanket around her shoulders and sat in the plastic Adirondack chair that the landlord had left on the shared porch, as though one chair was sufficient for 2 units. I sat on the top step with my tea. The street was empty. Halifax in November at 2 in the morning is very quiet and slightly damp, and the orange streetlights made everything look like the inside of an old photograph. You don't have to tell me anything, I said. We can just sit here. Okay, she said. We sat there. After a while, she said, my boyfriend and I broke up tonight, my ex-boyfriend. We broke up. He moved out 6 days ago and he's been calling every day, since to tell me he wants to work on things. And tonight I finally said yes. And then he told me he couldn't actually do it yet, because he needed more time. She paused. Which is not working on things. That is the opposite of working on things. I considered this. That's a terrible phone call. It was an extremely terrible phone call. How long were you together? 3 years. She pulled the blanket tighter. He's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He makes decisions the way people renovate kitchens. He starts, gets overwhelmed, and then lives with the counters half torn out for a year. I laughed before I could stop it. She glanced at me, surprised. Sorry, I said. No, it's accurate. Her mouth curved just slightly. What's your name? I know you're the vet because there was a cat carrier situation in March. Elliot. And the cat belongs to a friend. She was just staying with me for a week. Ren, she said. I teach English at Citadel High. That explains the bag of books. She looked at me. How long have you been paying attention to my bag of books? I'm a passive observer. The hallway is narrow. She looked like she was deciding whether that was creepy or fair, and ultimately landed on fair, which felt like a small victory. We talked until 3:30. Not about her ex, after the first few minutes. About other things. About Halifax in winter versus Halifax in summer, which is essentially two different cities with the same name. About what it means to move somewhere and not quite finish the act of arriving. About the particular loneliness of being 30 and having most of your close friends living in cities that require a flight to reach. I told her about Truro, about how I'd thought leaving would solve something, and how it had solved some things and left others exactly in place. She told me about Charlottetown, where she grew up, about the ferry and the red dirt roads and the way everything on the island felt slightly closer together, which you didn't notice until you left. At 3:30, she stood up and said she should sleep, and I agreed. At the door, she turned back. Thank you for knocking, she said. It was strange, but the right kind of strange. I'm available for strangely timed interventions. She smiled, small and real. Good night, Elliot. Inside, I stood in my kitchen and looked at the wall and thought, I want to hear that again. I should explain something about where I was, the person-shaped version of where, not just the city. I had been engaged once. Her name was Rochelle, and she was brilliant and impatient and wanted a life that moved faster than I did. We had been good together in the way that two people can be genuinely good together while also wanting different things, which is the cruelest kind of incompatibility because there's no villain and no clear answer. She ended at the spring before I moved to Halifax. She did it kindly. That almost made it harder. Kindness from the right direction is a comfort. Kindness from the direction of goodbye just sits there in your chest and takes up room. After that, I got careful. I got careful about the difference between loneliness and readiness. I told myself I was waiting until I was sure which one I was feeling before I did anything about either. 14 months in Halifax. Still waiting. The next morning, I found a sticky note on the mailbox. It said, "There's pasta in the fridge from Sunday. Unit B. You can leave the Tupperware outside the door." I ate the pasta for lunch. It was, objectively, excellent pasta. I left a note on her mailbox in return. I don't know what you put in this, but it should be illegal. Unit A also. I make very good tea if that's ever useful information. 2 days later, she knocked on my door and said she was making soup and did I want to come over, and I said yes before she finished the sentence. Her half of the duplex was warmer than mine, not in temperature, but in the way of it. There were books everywhere, organized by some system I couldn't immediately decode. There was a corkboard above her desk covered in quotes, written on index cards in different colors, some of them from novels I recognized, and some of them in handwriting I suspected was hers. There was a small plant on the windowsill that was doing its very best under the circumstances of a Halifax November. Your place is organized, she said, looking around when she came to get something I'd offered to carry. I live with animals all day. I need somewhere that's calm. She considered this. That's very self-aware. I've had years of practice at knowing my own limitations. She looked at me like she was filing that away. We ate soup and talked about her students, about mine, not patients, but the technician students I sometimes help train, about the particular difficulty of caring professionally about things that couldn't tell you in words how they were doing. She said teaching wasn't so different. She said some students couldn't tell you either, and the job was partly learning to read what wasn't being said. Is that how you read people generally? I asked. She thought about it honestly. Probably yes. My ex used to say I overanalyzed everything. A pause. His name is Derek, if you're wondering. It's fine to wonder. I was a little. He's not a bad person, she said again, the same way she had on the porch, like she'd learned to lead with it. He's just not quite done becoming whoever he's going to be. And I kept thinking I could wait. I kept my voice easy. That's a long time to live in someone else's timeline. She looked at me. Something shifted in her expression, a small recalibration. Yes, she said. It is. It was December by the time her cousin Phoebe called from Fredericton to say their aunt was having a retirement dinner in the city and the whole family was coming down and Derek had apparently told Phoebe's husband that he and Ren were working on things, which meant the dinner was now going to have a very unwelcome piece of misinformation baked into it. Ren told me this on the porch, in the dark, both of us in coats now because December had arrived with the particular commitment of maritime December. She had her hands around a mug, and she looked less upset than resigned, which I was beginning to recognize as her version of being upset. "I can go with you," I said. She looked at me sideways. As what? As someone who knows the actual situation, or as someone who makes your aunt ask who he is, which achieves the same goal through distraction. She laughed quietly. "My aunt will ask 17 questions. I answer questions for a living. Pet owners want to know everything. She'll ask if we're serious." I looked at her. The streetlight caught the side of her face. She was very still, watching me. "Are you asking me to lie?" I said. "I'm asking you to be flexible with chronology. Those are not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "They're not." A long pause. The harbor smell came in off the wind, salt and cold. "What if we don't call it anything?" I said. "We just show up." She studied me. "That's either very simple or very complicated. I think it's both." She looked down at her mug. Then she said quietly, "Derek will probably be there." I didn't want to say that up front. Something tightened in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, something adjacent to it, which was worse because I had less right to it. "You didn't invite him," I said. "No, Phoebe did. She thinks we're on the road back." "Are you?" She looked at me directly. "No." I nodded once. "Then we go." Her expression did the thing again, the thing before a smile, the deciding to risk it thing. It was becoming my favorite expression of hers. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." The retirement dinner was at a restaurant in the South End, the kind with exposed brick and a chalkboard menu and a wine list long enough to feel like a commitment. Ren's aunt, whose name was Marguerite and who was retiring after 32 years teaching at NSCC, was the kind of woman who enters a room and makes it slightly warmer without doing anything in particular. She shook my hand and looked me over, in the manner of someone who has read a great deal of fiction and can spot a plot development when she sees one. "Elliot," she said. "And you live next door. The other half of the duplex." "Convenient," she said, and the word carried more information than it appeared to. Ren pressed her fingers briefly against my arm and steered us toward her cousin Phoebe, who was small and quick-eyed and immediately wanted to know everything. I told her I was a vet. She told me her dog had a recurring ear thing. We had a very thorough conversation about ear things while Ren talked to her uncle, and by the time we sat down, I had made a genuine friend out of Phoebe, strictly on the basis of canine medicine. Derek arrived late. I knew it was him before Ren's hand found my forearm under the table. He was tall, loosely put together in the way of men who have always been considered good-looking without having to work at it, and he came in apologizing for the traffic on Quinpool in the warm, slightly theatrical manner of someone who knows how to enter a room. He kissed Marguerite on the cheek. He shook hands with Phoebe's husband. Then he saw Ren. His gaze moved to me, then back to her. "Hey," he said. "I didn't know you were bringing someone." "Elliot," she said, and the way she said it was matter-of-fact, not pointed, not performed. "Just, this is a fact that exists." I extended my hand. "Good to meet you." His grip was firm. "You too." He looked at Ren again. "You look good." "Thank you," she said. "Not, so do you." "Just, thank you." He found a seat 2 chairs down. The dinner began. For a long stretch, we were almost normal. The wine was good. Marguerite told a story about a student from 1998 that involved a fire extinguisher and what she diplomatically called a misunderstanding. The cousins argued warmly about whether Halifax or Fredericton had worse construction seasons. Ren's knee was close to mine under the table, not touching, just close. Then Derek leaned forward. "Ren, I've been thinking, can we find 5 minutes tonight? Before you head out?" The table didn't go quiet exactly, but the quality of the noise shifted. Ren set her glass down. Her voice was level. "Derek, just 5 minutes. I know we left things." She said it simply. Not angry. "I told you clearly. You said you needed more time. That's an answer." He looked at me, then at her. "I didn't expect you to move on this fast." "I moved next door," she said. "He knocked on my door because I was having a hard night and he didn't want me to be alone. That's who he is." A pause, small and precise. It's different from what I had. The table had now fully registered that something was happening. Marguerite watched with the calm attention of someone who has taught long enough to recognize the exact moment a student figures out their own essay. Derek's expression went through several things. He landed on gracious, which was the wrong landing. Well, he said, I hope you're happy. I'm getting there, Ren said. After dessert, Phoebe found a moment to squeeze Ren's shoulder and say, good for you, low and sincere. Marguerite shook my hand at the door and said, she doesn't let people in easily. Pay attention to what that means. Then she let me go before I could answer. Outside, the December air hit hard after the warmth of the restaurant. We walked without deciding to walk, just moving away from the door and then continuing. The south end was quiet. The old houses lit up behind bare trees, the salt smell coming up from the harbor a few blocks over. You okay? I asked. Yes, she exhaled slowly. More than I expected to be. You didn't need me in there. She looked at me sideways. No, but I wanted you there. A beat. That's different. I didn't answer right away. We walked half a block. What you said. I started. I meant it, she said. About the different, I wasn't performing. I know. She stopped at the corner under a streetlight. Her breath made small clouds in the cold. I don't know what this is, she said, honest and direct. In the way I was learning was just how she was. I'm not entirely through the Derek thing. That's real. I don't want to use you as a bridge to somewhere else. I know. I just want to say that clearly. I appreciate it. She looked up at me. Her eyes were dark in the orange light, and her face was serious in the way that meant she was actually being serious. You're very calm about this. I work with animals who can't communicate in words. I've learned to sit with uncertainty. She stared at me for a moment. Then she laughed, and the laugh broke the cold air and something in my chest with it. That, she said, is either the strangest or the best thing anyone has said to me on a street corner. I'll take either. She looked at me for another second. Then she stepped forward and kissed me. Not a long kiss. Deliberate and brief and certain, the way she seemed to do most things. Her cold nose brushed my cheek and her hands were in her coat pockets, and she didn't reach for me, just gave me that one careful, chosen thing. When she stepped back, her expression was different. Lighter. Okay, she said, like that settled something. Let's get the 14 bus. My feet are dying. We found a stop and waited in the cold, shoulders together, and she complained about her boots, with the specificity of someone who has very strong footwear opinions, and I told her about a dog I'd seen that morning who had managed to eat most of a mitten, and she said how and I said commitment, and we were still talking when the bus came. On the way home, she fell slightly asleep against my shoulder, just for 2 stops, and jerked awake and looked mortified, and I pretended not to notice, which was the gentlest lie I'd told in months. At the duplex door, she found her keys and then paused. I had a good time, she said. More than I expected. Me too. She looked at me, then at her door, then back. Come in for tea, because I'm not ready to end the night. Not because. She stopped. I'm stating this clearly on purpose. I know, I said. That's why I like talking to you. Her apartment was warm and bright and smelled like the candle she'd left burning on the kitchen counter, something cedar adjacent. She made tea efficiently, the way people do in their own kitchens when they've made tea 10,000 times, and I sat at her small table and watched her and felt the specific quality of ease that comes from being somewhere you didn't expect to fit. We sat on her couch with the tea and talked until past midnight, and then didn't talk, just sat with the quiet between us, which was not uncomfortable, which was its own kind of information. At some point she said, "Can I ask you something?" Yes. The engagement. You mentioned it once, briefly. I looked at my mug. Her name was Rochelle. It ended well, which doesn't mean it didn't end. I spent a long time after trying to figure out whether I was sad about her specifically or sad about the idea of what we were building. Which was it? Both. In different proportions, at different times. Ren was quiet for a moment. Derek made me feel like wanting consistency was too much to ask for. Like being someone he had to show up for was an imposition. A pause. I don't want to feel like that again. I turned to look at her. You're not an imposition. She held my gaze. You've known me for 5 weeks. Accurate. I'm working with limited data. Her mouth curved. And the data is good. She looked down, and color came into her face, and she looked younger for a moment, less guarded, more like herself. And I thought, there it is. That's the real one. The one under the careful management of everything. I'm scared too, I said, for what it's worth. She looked up. Of what? being wrong about what's real. I held her gaze. That's the part that stuck with Rochelle. Not that she left. That I'd thought we were building something and she was already somewhere else. Ren's hand moved across the cushion between us and rested near mine. Not on mine, near it. This is real, she said. It's new and it's small and I don't know where it goes. But it's not a bridge. You're not a distraction. A pause. You knocked on my door at 2 in the morning and sat on a cold porch because you didn't want me to be alone. I've been thinking about that for 5 weeks. I turned my hand over. She looked at it, then placed hers in it. We sat like that for a while. The candle burned down. Outside, a car went past slowly on Agricola, headlights sweeping the ceiling. Essentially, she walked me to her door, and I went back through the shared entryway to my side, which took approximately 6 seconds and felt like a longer journey than it was. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the wall and thought about what she'd said. Not a bridge, a choice. That landed differently than I expected. The next morning there was a sticky note on my door. I slept. First time, all week. Unit B, I wrote back. Good. Unit A. Also, you owe me for the Marguerite debrief I didn't get to give you. She knocked 10 minutes later with coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table. And I gave her the full Marguerite debrief, which included the handshake and the pay attention to what that means. And Ren put her face in her hands and said, "Oh no," and then laughed until the coffee went sideways. Derek texted twice more over the following weeks. Ren showed me both texts without being asked, which told me something. The second one she responded to with 3 sentences, clear and final, the way she wrote, and then she put her phone down and said, "Okay, done." And it was. Her mother called from Charlottetown to say she'd heard through Phoebe that Ren had brought someone to Marguerite's dinner and was everything all right. Ren said yes. Her mother said she just wanted to make sure Ren wasn't rushing into something, and Ren said, voice patient and fond, and very precise, "I'm not rushing, I'm choosing. Those are different things." There was a pause, and then her mother said all right, and asked about the plant on the windowsill, and the conversation became about something else entirely. We moved slowly and then not uncertainly. There were real dates. A Sunday matinee at the Khyber, a long walk along the waterfront in January that ended with our faces completely numb, and a very necessary stop at a cafe on Barrington. There was the Tuesday I brought home a hamster that needed 48 hours of supervised recovery, and Ren came over and named him Senator and sat with him for 2 hours with a focus and tenderness that absolutely broke something open in me. There was the Friday night she fell asleep on my couch reading while I finished a case file, and I covered her with the blanket from the back of the chair and went to bed. And in the morning, she woke up disoriented and then saw me and visibly relaxed, which I tried not to think about too much because it was too much. We were careful. We named things as they came. She told me when she needed space, and I gave it. I told her when the Rochelle-shaped part of my brain started running its old loops, and she didn't try to fix it, just said I know, and meant it. In February, the wall between our units started letting through sound differently. Not worse, just differently. The plaster did something in the cold that made everything slightly more permeable. On a Thursday evening, I heard her laughing at something on television and felt it like warmth through the wall, which is a physically indefensible thing to say but was nonetheless true. I knocked on her door. She answered mid-law, still looking back at the TV, and then looked at me, and the laugh changed quality slightly. "Come in," she said. Not a question. I did. We watched the rest of whatever she was watching, and she explained the context of a joke from 40 minutes earlier with the detailed patience of someone who genuinely wanted me to find it funny. And I did find it funny, and she was absurdly pleased about this. At some point, she leaned against me. I put my arm around her. She fit there the way things do when they've been placed with care. "I like this," she said. "Me too." She tilted her head up to look at me. I was afraid to like things for a while, after Derek. Like, if I started wanting things, I'd just end up waiting again. "Are you waiting now?" She considered it honestly, the way she did everything. Then, "No. I think this is the thing." I kissed her because there was nothing better to say, and she kissed back in the unhurried way of someone who has decided they have time. And the television kept going quietly in the corner, and the old house settled around us, and outside it was February in Halifax, which is about as cold as the world gets. But inside it was very warm. In March, Phoebe came down for a weekend and stayed in Ren's half of the duplex, and I came over for dinner both nights. And on the second night, Phoebe said to me, while Ren was in the kitchen, "She looks different. Good different. Like she stopped bracing for something." I said I knew what she meant. Phoebe said, "Good. Don't waste it." Then Ren came back with wine, and Phoebe looked completely innocent, and we had dinner. Spring came slowly to Halifax, the way it always does, like it's deciding whether to commit. The harbor light changed first. Then the trees on Agricola went uncertain and then suddenly, fully green, which happens faster than you expect every year and still catches you off guard every year. One evening in April, Ren was on the porch when I came home from work. She had a book and the season's first real warmth was happening, and she had her face tipped up to catch it. I sat on the step, same as that first night in November, and she closed her book and we watched the street for a while without needing it to be anything. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "The lease on this place. Both halves are month to month now." She paused. "I talked to the landlord. There's a two-bedroom over on Fern Lane, coming available in June." I looked at her, she looked at me. "I'm not saying it has to be us. I'm just saying I noticed it. And I noticed I wanted to mention it to you." The evening light came sideways through the maple at the end of the yard. Somewhere down the street, someone was grilling something and the smoke drifted over, and the whole thing felt very much like the exact moment a season actually changes. "I'd want to see it," I said. She smiled. Small first, then larger. "Okay, I want to note," I said, "that it will not have the structural poetry of a shared wall. No, it'll just have a shared everything." I reached over and took her hand. She threaded her fingers through mine like it was a thing she'd been doing for years, which in the way that matters, she had. We went to see the place on Fern Lane on a Saturday morning in May. Ren walked through it with her arms crossed, which is what she does when she's thinking hard, and made a note on her phone about the kitchen light and asked the property manager two questions so specific they clearly intimidated him. I stood in the larger bedroom and looked at the window and thought about the wall on Agricola and the green digits saying 207 and the sound that had come through the plaster and my own hand going to the door before I'd made a decision about it. We took the place. Moving out of the duplex was strange in the particular way of leaving somewhere that was supposed to be temporary and turned out to be the place where something permanent started. I stood in my empty half for a minute before handing the keys to the landlord and thought about the kettle and the mug and the wall and felt glad in a way I didn't entirely have words for. Ren was waiting on the sidewalk with a box of books and an expression of extreme readiness to be somewhere with a better bathroom. We moved everything in one day, with Phoebe on FaceTime providing unhelpful commentary from Fredericton, and that night we ordered from a Thai place on Quinpool and sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by boxes, and ate with plastic forks, and Ren complained about the fork situation, with the kind of feeling that belongs to larger things, and then laughed at herself for it, and I laughed with her, and the place started to feel like ours. Senator the hamster was fully recovered and living in a proper habitat on the bookshelf and regarded all of this with the dignified indifference of a creature who has been through worse. Sometimes now, I pass the duplex on Agricola. When I'm cutting through the neighborhood, it looks the same. Same plastic chair on the porch, same narrow shared entryway, same mailboxes side by side. Some other Unit A and Unit B living their separate lives on the other side of that wall, probably learning each other in the slow, accidental way that old buildings allow. I think about the woman who came to the door in a navy Dalhousie sweatshirt and reassembled her face very quickly and said, "I'll keep it down," like the problem was volume. I think about the porch at 2 in the morning and the cold and the orange streetlights and the way she'd said, "Thank you for knocking. It was the right kind of strange." It was. It still is. The right kind of strange is, I think, just the beginning of something real before it has a name or a lease or a hamster on the bookshelf. It's the moment before you know what it is, when all you have is that you knocked, and she opened the door, and neither of you walked away. That was the whole thing, really. That was how it started.